Why did no one move when her wings hit the floor? The uniform landed with a dull thud on the hangar's polished concrete, and 200 eyes watched as Colonel Harrison stepped forward. His boot came down, grinding the insignia into the dust like it was nothing. "You want to play soldier?" His voice carried through the cavernous space, sharp, deliberate. "You think they lowered the standards just so you could belong?" He let the silence sharpen, then with a cruel smile, "Maybe get her a pink beret too." Not a single laugh, not a single word, just the sound of her breathing, steady, measured, like someone used to holding fire inside. Sarah Mitchell didn't blink. She unpinned her wings with slow precision, as if each motion mattered, then placed them beside the crumpled fabric. The crowd saw nothing in her face, but something flickered just under her collar, a tattoo. A dagger wrapped in wings. Most didn't notice. One man up on the observation deck did, and when he recognized it, his expression froze. She turned without a word, walking through the hush, leaving nothing behind but silence and shame. Would you have fought back, shouted, tried to prove them wrong? Or would you have done what she did, walked away in silence, waiting for a moment they would never expect? Because sometimes the most powerful response isn't the one we think it should be. Sarah Mitchell was 35 years old, living in a modest apartment on the dusty outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. To her neighbors, she was the quiet woman in Unit 312, the one who taught high school algebra and never complained when their kids played soccer too close to her door. Every morning at 5:30, she ran 10 miles through the empty streets, not for fitness, not for discipline, but because silence at that hour was easier to breathe. Her apartment reflected the same deliberate simplicity: white walls, sparse furniture, a bookshelf stacked with math textbooks and aviation manuals no one noticed. The only decoration was a single framed photograph on the counter, its colors faded by years of sun. A silhouette of an aircraft against a crimson sunset sky. No one had ever asked about it, and she'd never explained. Her phone, an old model with a cracked screen, rarely lit up. She had no social media, no digital footprints, no connection to the past she had buried. When fellow teachers invited her for drinks after school, she declined politely. After the first year, they stopped asking. The principal once joked she was like a ghost, never late, never sick, never part of the gossip or the drama. He had no idea how close he was to the truth. Because ghosts have histories, and hers was written in the skis. The flyer for the civilian-to-military pilot program at Edwards Air Force Base had appeared on her desk like an echo of a life she'd sworn was dead. She filled out the application with the same neat handwriting she used to grade homework, carefully listing 500 hours of experience in a Cessna 172. True enough, she had logged exactly 500 hours in that aircraft. What she left out were the other 9,400, the ones logged in machines most of the world didn't know existed. At first, the committee dismissed her file. Just another dreamer who thought Top Gun was a documentary they scribbled. But then came the test scores. Every assessment, flight systems, tactical knowledge, emergency procedures, perfect. Flawless. They admitted her reluctantly, not knowing they were opening the door to a legend they once buried. On her first day, Sarah parked her aging Honda Civic between a Porsche and a Tesla. She carried a single bag into the briefing hall and sat quietly in the back. To everyone else, she was invisible, a middle-aged woman chasing an adventure too late in life. Brad Thompson, son of a senator and heir to a fortune, had smirked when he saw her. "Lost, ma'am. Cafeteria's in the other building." She didn't answer, just opened her notebook and started scribbling equations in the margins. Not notes on the briefing. Calculations, energy management in vertical climbs, thrust-to-weight ratios, corner velocity charts. Habits that died harder than dreams. None of them knew that 10 years earlier, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had been the youngest pilot in history to qualify on the F-22 Raptor. They called her Ghost, not because she was invisible, but because She had the uncanny ability to appear on an enemy's six without warning, a specter of death above 40,000 feet. By 21, she had graduated from MIT in aerospace engineering. She spoke 4 languages. She could disassemble an F-16's flight system blindfolded. Psych evaluators called her reaction times beyond human. Her instructors had run out of ways to challenge her. General Roberts had written in her file, "This one's special, trajectory unlimited." But talent in the military is blood in the water. It draws predators. Her squadron commander, Major Derek Coleman, was one of them. He built his career on connections, not skill. The first time Sarah outflew him in training, pulling an 8G Herbst maneuver while he blacked out, something in his pride snapped. From then on, his mission was simple: destroy her before she could eclipse him. He scheduled her out of key missions, sabotaged her maintenance schedules, wrote performance reports that damned her with faint praise. But ability can't be erased. When the Air Force needed someone for Operation Steel Eagle, a Black Ops mission over Syrian airspace, Sarah was the unanimous choice. Coleman handled the planning, fed her coordinates, laid the trap. At 2 in the morning, she crossed into Syrian skies at 30 feet, skimming so low the radar barely registered her. Then it happened. 3 MiG-29s lit up the dark. Ground-based SAMs fired like a Christmas tree. Coleman had sent her into an ambush. In 90 seconds of chaos, Sarah downed all 3 fighters and destroyed 2 missile sites, then egressed at Mach 1.8. She chose survival over suicide, but the chemical weapons facility remained intact. The fallout was brutal. Coleman scrubbed the mission files, rewrote her flight path, testified that she'd gone rogue. The Syrians supported his story. Sarah could have fought, but she knew how these stories ended. Coleman had connections. She had the truth, and the truth doesn't always survive politics. She resigned quietly, buried her wings, taught algebra instead. But Coleman hadn't just ended her career. He had taken her brother's life. James Mitchell, a helicopter pilot with the 160th SOAR, had stepped into one of Coleman's missions, hopping to protect her. Coleman's false coordinates led James straight into a kill zone. His Black Hawk was shot down. The official report blamed mechanical failure. Sarah knew better. She stood in the rain at Arlington, watching the flag fold over his coffin, and made 2 promises: disappear so Coleman could never touch her again. And remember, not for revenge, but for justice, if the chance ever came. For 10 years, she kept those promises. She learned to live small, to find victory in her students' smiles, in the desert blooming after rare rain, in silence that didn't demand. She almost believed it was enough. Then she saw the name. The program announcement carried the signature of Colonel Harrison, commanding officer, but Sarah knew better. Derek Coleman had taken a new name after his last scandal. He was back, and leading this program. She applied that night, not because she wanted another chance at the sky, but because she knew exactly what she was walking into, exactly how it would end. The humiliation began immediately. Brad Thompson gathered the others into an elite circle and left her out. Instructors called on her with impossible questions, waiting for her to fail. She answered calmly every time. When they sabotaged her simulators, she just adapted. When they erased her materials, she redid them from memory. By week 8, the sabotage was open. Lockers emptied, parking blocked. Even the women who had once stood beside her now avoided her, survival instinct winning over sisterhood. And Harrison Coleman watched with satisfaction. During briefs, he cut her down. When she flew perfect maneuvers, he questioned the equipment. The message was clear: Sarah Mitchell did not belong, and anyone who stood with her would fall too. What none of them knew was this: every moment of humiliation, every whisper, every act of sabotage was being noted, remembered, filed away in her mind like a mission log. She had survived worse in combat, and she understood patience better than any of them. But the day would come, and when it did, They wouldn't see her as the quiet woman in the back of the room anymore. They would see what they had tried to bury. A ghost. And ghosts don't forget. Why did her silence bother them more than her words ever could? By the 12th week, the air inside the classroom had shifted. Every time Sarah entered, conversations dipped, laughter dimmed, and eyes avoided hers like she carried something contagious. Maybe shame was contagious. Maybe dignity was. Either way, she wore both like armor, even as the pressure mounted. Brad Thompson had become the star of the program, his arrogance gilded by wealth and connections. Every night he held court in the officers' club, talking loud enough for Sarah to hear. "The thing about high-altitude navigation," he explained once, spreading his hands like a seasoned professor, "is that you need instinct you can't learn from books. You need jet time, real jet time. Cessna pilots, they'll never understand. They think it's just instruments. But when you're pushing Mach 1.5, everything changes." Sarah didn't even look up. Her pen scratched across the page, finishing a calculation on thrust-to-weight ratios at varying altitudes. Equations steadied her. Equations didn't lie. Still, the ridicule chipped at her, not because she cared what Thompson thought, but because she saw the younger women in the program, Jennifer, Maria, Lisa, folding under the weight of his influence. One by one, they drifted from her side of the room to his. Self-preservation is louder than solidarity. Sarah understood. She didn't judge them for it, but the loneliness pressed heavier with each day. Harrison Coleman watched with the eyes of a man who had waited a decade for this chance. Every critique he leveled at her was sharper, more public. "Mitchell," he barked once, "your flight plan is correct on paper, but it shows no tactical awareness. We don't need calculators, we need warriors." Another time, after she executed a flawless overhead brake in the T-38, he muttered about simulator calibration, as though her precision could be reduced to a software glitch. Sarah stood at attention each time, answering nothing. Inside, her hands itched to fly, because when she flew, the noise stopped. Even the simulators weren't safe. Systems failed without reason. Hydraulics dropped mid-session. Nav systems rebooted themselves. At first, Sarah thought it was coincidence. But when the senior technician, Tom Rodriguez, pulled her aside, she knew better. "Someone's tampering with your profile," he whispered. "Changing settings after hours. If I report it," he glanced toward Harrison's office. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I'll lose my job, I'm sorry." Sarah nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." He looked like he wanted to say more, but the fear was stronger. The sabotage worsened, training manuals vanished, lockers were emptied, cones appeared around her parking spot. It was petty, childish, but effective. She carried on, calm on the surface, fury burning beneath. It wasn't the sabotage that hurt most. It was the isolation, the way the other women had peeled away. She once thought they might stand together. But when Brad Thompson whispered that Jennifer Adams had real potential and that associating with the wrong people could end her career before it began, Sarah saw the shift. Jennifer avoided her in the halls. Maria and Lisa followed within days. Sarah told herself she didn't mind. But in the quiet of her apartment, staring at the old photograph of her brother's Black Hawk, the loneliness cut deeper. James had been her wingman long before he ever wore a uniform. Now she was flying alone. By the time the 12th week arrived, Harrison had planned his masterpiece, the formation evaluation. Sarah was assigned to lead a four-ship formation with the weakest pilots in the class, the ones barely hanging on. Thompson, of course, handpicked the top performers for his own flight. "Don't worry, Mitchell," he called across the briefing room, his grin sharp as a blade. "When you wash out, I'm sure some flight school somewhere needs a ground instructor." The room laughed. Harrison didn't stop it. Sarah said nothing. But when she strapped into the T-38 that day, something shifted. For the first time in a decade, she felt it, the clarity, that crystalline calm that descended whenever she was in the cockpit. The noise fell away. The doubts, the loneliness, all gone. The three students flying behind her were terrified, their radio calls shaky, their formations loose. Sarah keyed her mic, her voice calm, steady, absolute. "Phoenix Flight, this is lead. Listen to my voice. Trust your training. We're going to fly as one unit. Copy my movements exactly. Don't think, just follow." Something in her tone cut through their fear. They steadied. And for 45 minutes, Sarah Mitchell performed the impossible. She flew with such precision that her wingmen, novices on the edge of collapse, moved like extensions of her own body. Their planes, which had wobbled moments before, now held tight formation. Their fear gave way to instinct. They began to trust. Thompson's formation swept in aggressively, confident they'd cut her apart. But Sarah used her team's weakness as strength. She simplified their maneuvers, kept their geometry tight, turned predictability into armor. Every intercept Thompson attempted collapsed against her calm. In the control room, instructors leaned forward, whispering disbelief. Harrison's face grew darker with each pass. When it ended, the debrief video replayed their flight. 4 aircraft moving in perfect unison, as though one mind controlled them. The younger pilots looked at each other in awe. "I've never felt flying like that," one whispered. "It was like she was in my cockpit with me." Sarah allowed herself the faintest smile. "You always had it in you. Sometimes we just need someone to show us the way." But Harrison wouldn't let it stand. "There must be a malfunction in the recording system," he said flatly. "No one flies formation like that on their first attempt. We'll repeat the exercise tomorrow." They repeated it. Sarah's team flew tighter, cleaner, better. There was no denying it now. The struggling pilots she'd led approached her afterward, tears in their eyes. Their gratitude was genuine, their belief in themselves restored. For Sarah, that was enough. But for Harrison, it was only the beginning. The next test would not be something she could survive quietly. And she knew it. That night back in her apartment, Sarah sat alone at the table. The old wooden box lay open before her. Inside were medals she never spoke of, a letter in James' handwriting, a sealed envelope from General Roberts. She touched each piece gently, like fragile relics of a life she'd buried. The weight of her brother's words pressed against her. "You carry the sky in your soul. Nobody can take that from you." She whispered into the quiet room. "Then why does it feel like they already have?" Her reflection in the window looked back at her. Not the quiet teacher, not the forgotten pilot, someone else. Someone she wasn't sure she wanted to be again. Outside, the desert wind howled. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the test that could either break her or remind everyone exactly who she was. A ghost. And ghosts don't vanish. What happens when the weakest team walks into a fight? Everyone expects them to lose. The midterm evaluation was designed to separate the hopefuls from the failures. 8 jets split into 2 4-ship formations, locked in a simulated beyond visual range dogfight. On paper, the matchup wasn't even close. Sarah had been handed the same 3 struggling students she'd led before. Thompson commanded the best of the best, his formation stacked with top-tier performers. It should have been a massacre. In the control room, instructors leaned forward, waiting to watch Sarah's flight crumble. Harrison stood with arms crossed, lips curved in a smile that wasn't a smile at all. Sarah's team sat scattered on radar screens, defensive, disorganized. Thompson's squadron swept in from above with speed and altitude advantage, a predator ready to strike. The setup was perfect for them, but Sarah had been watching. For 12 weeks she'd studied every pilot in the program. She knew their tells, their weaknesses, the small habits they couldn't erase. She keyed her mic, voice low, measured. "Phoenix Flight, tactical turn west. Descend to Angels 5. Kill your radars, we're going dark." Her wingmen obeyed without question. The trust she'd built during formation training held firm. For 30 seconds, Thompson's team searched empty sky. No radar returns, no targets, Then the trap snapped shut. Phoenix Flight targets by voice. Phoenix 2 Northern Bandit. Phoenix 3 Middle. Phoenix 4 Trailer. I've got lead. Fox 3. Now. 4 simultaneous missile launches appeared on the simulation. Thompson's pilots scrambled, but Sarah had predicted their evasive moves before they even made them. She knew Thompson would favor a split-S under pressure, that his wingman always overpulled high angles of attack. She had timed her shots to the fraction of a second. 8 seconds later, the computer registered 4 kills. The control room erupted in disbelief. "Run it again," Harrison snapped. "Simulation malfunction." They reset. The scenario played out again. Sarah adjusted, quicker this time. 6 seconds to wipe out Thompson's elite team. By the third reset, her novice wingmen were laughing in their cockpits, exhilarated. "Ma'am," Phoenix 3 said breathlessly, "I think I understand energy management now." "Ma'am," Phoenix 2 added, "can you teach us that barrel roll defense after this?" Even Thompson's own wingmen couldn't contain their curiosity during the debrief. "How did you know our vectors? How did you time that shot?" The hunger to learn outweighed the peer pressure to mock. But Harrison wouldn't allow it. "This proves nothing," he barked, cutting off questions. "Real combat isn't a video game. Simulations are unreliable. Mitchell endangered her wingmen by showing off. Tactics like that get people killed." The words hung heavy in the room. Students shifted uncomfortably. They had seen brilliance and they had seen fear in Thompson's eyes, but Harrison was the authority. And in military aviation, authority is oxygen. Without it, you suffocate. Sarah said nothing. She sat in silence, her face unreadable. But inside, her brother's voice echoed. "Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, especially when you're terrified." That night she ran 10 miles through the desert streets. The rhythm of her feet on asphalt steadied her thoughts. Every step reminded her, Coleman wasn't done. He would never be done until he broke her completely. And he was saving his masterpiece for the hangar. The all-hands meeting was scheduled under the guise of program-wide updates. Everyone knew better. The briefing board showed Sarah's name with a red slash through it. 200 people gathered in a circle, leaving her standing in the center like a prisoner awaiting judgment. Harrison took the stage with calculated precision. His voice was firm, calm, righteous. "Mitchell's logs show irregularities. Her scores are statistically impossible. Her background check reveals gaps that raise security concerns. How can anyone trust a pilot who refuses to integrate, who shows off at the expense of mission success, who thinks the rules don't apply?" He gestured toward Thompson, toward the other top students. "These are the future of aviation, team players, leaders. Mitchell represents everything wrong with inclusion over excellence." The crowd shifted. No one spoke. The silence was consent, and Harrison fed on it. Finally, his voice dropped, cold and sharp enough to cut air. "You have a choice, Mitchell. Remove your uniform voluntarily, leave with what dignity you have left, or security escorts you out. Every failure, every shortcoming, every reason you'll never belong will be detailed in front of this entire community." He leaned in slightly, but his words carried through the hangar. "What's it going to be?" Sarah stood motionless. For a moment she wasn't in the hangar. She was standing in the rain at Arlington, watching the flag fold over James' coffin. She was back in that cockpit in Syria, fire streaking the night, betrayal burning hotter than missile trails. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately. She unpinned her wings, removed her flight jacket, laid both on the floor. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was something heavier. Even the air seemed to pause. When she turned and walked out, no one moved to stop her. But in the observation deck above, someone had seen the faint shimmer of a tattoo beneath her collar, a dagger wrapped in wings. Their breath caught. Recognition flickered. Ghost. The legend wasn't dead. She had only been waiting. That night back in her apartment, Sarah opened the wooden box she hadn't touched in years. Inside, medals wrapped in tissue, a purple heart, a distinguished flying cross, a letter in her brother's handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, something gone wrong, don't blame yourself. You carry the sky in your soul. Nobody can take that from you. Remember that courage isn't being fearless. It's doing what's right even when you're terrified. Beneath it, a sealed envelope. General Roberts' handwriting, open only in case of emergency. Her hands didn't shake as she broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a phone number. Sarah, I know you. You'll try to disappear, but Coleman isn't done. He'll hurt others. When you're ready to stop him, call this number. Some battles can't be won by walking away. She sat with the letter for an hour, the weight of 10 years pressing down. Coleman had taken her brother. He had stolen careers, crushed lives. Tomorrow he would humiliate her in front of the entire aviation community. Unless she reminded them what real power looked like. At midnight she dialed. The voice on the other end was older but unmistakable. Roberts. She closed her eyes. General, it's Ghost, I need a favor. Silence, then warmth that almost broke her composure. Sarah, I've been waiting 10 years for this call. What do you need? Her decision crystallized in that moment. I need something they can't ignore, something they can't cover up or explain away. Roberts chuckled, low and thunderous. How do you feel about French engineering? I happen to know where we can borrow a Rafale. Diplomatic exchange, perfectly legal if anyone asks. Sir, that's a frontline fighter. The implications. Sarah, Roberts interrupted gently. Do you think Coleman's the only one playing politics? I've got senators and the Secretary of the Air Force ready to move on him. But we need cause, public cause. You showing up in a Rafale after he said you can't fly, that ends careers. For the first time in weeks, Sarah smiled. When? 800. Nellie's has one on the ramp. A certain French captain will have a family emergency. Lucky we have someone with the certifications. My certifications expired 10 years ago. Did they? Funny. My records say you've been maintaining proficiency on classified test programs. Black budget, very hush-hush. He paused. Sarah, are you sure? There's no going back. Her eyes fell on the photograph of James, his smile frozen in time. I've been hiding for 10 years. It's time to remember who I am. Dawn crept over the Mojave the next morning, painting mountains purple and gold. Sarah left her Civic at home, called a taxi, carried only a small bag. Inside, her old flight suit, the ghost suit. No name, no rank, no patches. The Rafale sat on the ramp, sleek and lethal, a predatory bird waiting to soar. The crew chief saluted. Ma'am, she's fueled and ready, weather clear. General Roberts sends his regards. She ran her hand along its wing. Beautiful bird. The sergeant lowered his voice. We heard what happened yesterday. Some of us remember. What you did for Captain Stevens when his hydraulics failed. How you talked him through when everyone else gave up. It's an honor to prep your aircraft again. Sarah climbed into the cockpit. Systems different but not alien. Her hands remembered. Her body remembered. Muscle memory doesn't fade. Good engineering speaks the same language everywhere. The engines roared to life, and suddenly she wasn't a teacher anymore. She was Ghost. And she had work to do. What do you do when the sky itself becomes your voice? At exactly 800, Colonel Harrison stood in Hangar 7 before 200 students and instructors. Sarah's uniform still lay where she had left it, a crumpled heap on the concrete. His speech was prepared, a sermon about standards, about why discipline and unity mattered more than talent, about how emotional instability could destroy an aviator's career. He would use Sarah Mitchell as an example. Brad Thompson and his circle smirked in the front row, already rehearsing their own future arrogance. The three novices Sarah had once led stood in the back, their eyes hard, their shoulders heavy with disappointment. Jennifer Adams glanced at her phone, restless. Harrison reached his crescendo. This is why we cannot allow sympathy or political correctness to compromise our standards. This is why. The building shook. Windows rattled. A sound split the sky sharp, tearing like silk ripped apart by unseen hands. Then came the crack, the unmistakable boom of a fighter breaking the sound barrier overhead. Heads snapped upward. Through the hangar doors, a blur of motion cut the sky. A Dassault Rafale in French Air Force colors, knifing across the desert at 500 feet. Gasps filled the room. The jet climbed vertical, slicing into the morning sun, rolling as it went. "Airspace violation," Harrison roared. "Scramble alert fighters." But the tower's voice over the speakers was calm, almost reverent. "Edwards Tower to all personnel. Stand down. Authorized Allied training in progress." Authorized training. The words landed like thunder. The Rafale climbed to 30,000 feet, then dove back toward the Earth, corkscrewing with a precision that defied physics. At 200 feet, it leveled, inverted, the pilot's helmeted head visible through the canopy. The crowd held its breath. Then the radio crackled across every loudspeaker in the hangar. "Edwards Tower, this is Ghost Zero. Request permission for tactical demonstration." The voice was calm, professional, unmistakable. "Sarah Mitchell." The tower controller's voice broke, almost trembling. "Ghost Zero, Edwards Tower. Cleared for whatever you need to do, ma'am. Airspace is yours." Chaos rippled across the hangar. The younger pilots fumbled for their phones, searching the name Ghost. Older instructors stood frozen, their faces pale. Ghost was a myth, a whisper traded in ready rooms. An F-22 pilot who could make jets dance ballet in combat. A legend no one ever thought they'd see again. Harrison's face drained white. He screamed into his phone, demanded explanations. No one listened. Because outside, the Rafale had begun its masterpiece. Sarah pushed the aircraft through maneuvers that would be studied for years. A Lomsevac into a tail slide, recovered clean into a rolling circle. A Cobra that folded into a culbit, the aircraft seemingly hanging motionless before snapping back into control. She made the Rafale move like water, like thought itself. Phones recorded, eyes widened, and in the front row Brad Thompson whispered, his arrogance burned away. "Holy shit, nobody can do that." Jennifer Adams' voice was quiet, steady. "She can. Youngest ever on the F-22. First woman through red flag advanced. 18 confirmed kills in missions we're not supposed to know about. We've been mocking a legend." The demonstration lasted 20 minutes. She flew backwards for 30 seconds, steady. Spun flat from 20,000 feet, recovering at 50 above the runway. Drew shapes in the sky with smoke, messages only pilots could read. She wasn't just flying. She was reminding them what flight was supposed to mean. Then her voice returned over the speakers, cool and cutting. "Colonel Harrison, or should I say Derek Coleman, I know who you are. I know what you did. 10 years ago, you killed my brother with your lies. Today, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to show everyone what you tried to destroy." The silence in the hangar was absolute. "You told me to take off my uniform. I did, but you forgot something. You can take off a uniform. You can crush insignia, but some wings can't be taken away." The Rafale circled low, engines humming like thunder beneath control. Her voice softened. "To the students in Hangar 7, especially Phoenix 2, 3, and 4, remember this. Greatness isn't about making others small. It's about lifting them until they can fly beside you. Don't let anyone tell you the sky isn't yours. The sky doesn't care about politics. It only cares if you can fly true." The Rafale dipped, landing gear extended in salute. She opened the canopy and raised her hand in a perfect salute. Not to Coleman, not to the crowd, but to the memory of every life destroyed by men like him. Then she pulled vertical, disappearing into the blue. The hangar stood frozen, A silence that wasn't silence at all. It was awe. Then came the convoy. Black SUVs rolled onto the flight line. General Roberts stepped out, flanked by federal agents. His voice carried across the tarmac. "Derek Coleman, you are under arrest for conspiracy, filing false reports, and contributing to the wrongful death of Captain James Mitchell." Gasps, movement. Harrison Coleman stammered, tried to speak, but agents cuffed him where he stood. Roberts turned to the stunned crowd. "For 10 years we've been building this case. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell volunteered to help us expose him. She endured harassment, sabotage, humiliation, so that we would have the proof we needed. Remember this. The warriors you mock may be legends in disguise. The quiet ones may be choosing restraint over retaliation. And sometimes justice comes on wings you never see coming." No one spoke. Phones recorded. History was already being written. That night Sarah sat alone in her Phoenix apartment. The rifle's roar still lived in her bones. She had done it. Not for glory, not for revenge, for James, for the truth. And yet her brother's words whispered back. "It's about doing what's right, especially when you're terrified." She wondered if she had done enough. The ghost of wings brushed her shoulders in the silence. What happens after the roar fades, when the crowd disperses and the sky grows quiet again? 1 week after the rifle flight, Phoenix streets looked the same as they always had. The sun rose hard and bright, the air carried the dry tang of desert dust, and the city stirred with its usual rhythms. But for Sarah, nothing was the same. At 5:30, she laced her running shoes and stepped outside. The first mile was steady, the second harder, the third easier. By the seventh, her breath evened into the rhythm she had carried for years, the sound of her life disguised as ordinary. But halfway through her route, another sound joined hers. Footsteps. Jennifer Adams matched her pace, breathing hard but determined. She didn't speak at first, just ran beside Sarah, the silence between them thick with things unsaid. Finally, Jennifer blurted it out. "Colonel Mitchell, I need to apologize." Sarah slowed slightly, giving the younger woman space to catch her breath. "No apology necessary." Jennifer shook her head. "It is necessary. I abandoned you. I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I just kept my head down, maybe I could survive. I was scared." Sarah glanced at her, expression calm. "Fear is human. You protected your career. I understand." "But it was wrong." Jennifer's voice broke. "I've fought my whole life to be taken seriously. I thought playing their games was the only way. But now I see playing their games means becoming them." They ran in silence for a few more strides. Sarah finally asked softly, "And now?" Jennifer's answer came firm, steady. "Now I know there's another way. You showed me." The younger woman's words stirred something inside Sarah, something she hadn't let herself feel since the rifle touched down. She remembered James' smile, his letters, his belief in doing what was right. Maybe this was what he meant. "Are you going back?" Jennifer asked. "To the Air Force. They'd give you any post you wanted. You could reshape the entire culture." Sarah slowed to a jog, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "My flying days aren't over, but my military days are. I've found peace in teaching. Kids who think they're not good enough, not smart enough, watching them see their own potential. That's my mission now." Jennifer frowned, not out of disrespect but disbelief. "But you're the best pilot in the world." Sarah's voice was calm, certain. "Maybe, but being the best isn't the point. Helping others see their own strength, that matters more." They reached the end of the trail. Jennifer's car was parked there, dust on the windshield. They cooled down together, stretching in silence. Finally, Jennifer asked the question she had been holding back. "The rifle, how? You haven't flown in 10 years." Sarah's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Who says I haven't?" Jennifer blinked, "But—" Sarah cut her off gently. "Test pilots for classified programs don't file public flight plans. Some secrets are worth keeping, even from yourself, until the moment you need them." Jennifer exhaled, almost laughing, almost crying. She nodded, then left, her expression lighter than when she'd arrived. Sarah watched her go, then turned back toward her apartment. The morning was cool, the desert sky wide open. She thought about James again, about Roberts, about Coleman's face as the cuffs closed around his wrists. She thought about silence and the choices made within it. At Desert Valley High School, word spread quickly. Ms. Mitchell's class was different, they said. She didn't just teach math. She taught something else, something you could feel when she explained how numbers worked. Her class grew from 12 students to 45. Her pass rate on the AP Calculus exam hit 100%. She didn't tell them who she had been. She didn't need to. They learned enough in the way she looked at them, in the way she pushed them, in the way she refused to let them quit. One afternoon, after the last bell had rung, she sat at her desk grading papers. The wooden box lay tucked away at home again, closed this time. She didn't need to open it every night anymore, but she thought of it still. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. General Roberts stepped into the classroom, out of uniform, looking older but steadier somehow. "Mind if I sit?" Sarah gestured to one of the small desks, smiling as he folded his tall frame into the chair. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for Coleman, for everything after. The reforms, the investigations, the changes. It wouldn't have happened without you." Sarah shook her head. "It happened because of James. I just finished what he started." Roberts nodded, but his eyes carried weight. He pulled an envelope from his pocket, slid it across her desk. "The president wants to award you the Medal of Honor. Retroactive, Syria, Afghanistan, full ceremony, media coverage." Sarah looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "With respect, sir, I'll decline." Roberts smiled faintly. "I told them you'd say that. Medals are for people who need validation. I know what I did. James knew. That's enough." Roberts studied her for a moment, then set another envelope on the desk. "In that case, a different offer. Quiet, no publicity, a consultancy with the academy, 2 weeks a year. Help us build a curriculum that teaches not just tactics but ethics, not just flying but leadership. We need your voice." Sarah looked at the stack of tests on her desk, at the whiteboard covered in equations. She thought about the faces of her students. Then she thought of James again. "2 weeks a year," she said softly, "and I keep teaching here." Roberts smiled. "Of course, we need you exactly where you are, but we also need you to make sure we never create another Coleman." Sarah nodded. "Then yes, for James, for all the pilots who deserve better." Roberts stood, adjusted his coat. At the door he paused. "When you flew that Rafale, you didn't just humiliate Coleman. You reminded an entire generation why we fly, not for power, not for glory, for the pure joy of defying gravity. Thank you for reminding us." When he left, the classroom was quiet again. Sarah returned to her papers. On one exam, a student had scribbled at the bottom, "Ms. Mitchell, I used to think math was about finding the right answer. Now I know it's about finding the right question. Thank you for teaching me to fly." Her pen hovered, then she wrote in the margin, "You always had wings. I just helped you unfold them." That night she stood on her balcony, watching the desert sky fade to indigo. She thought about the Rafale's roar, about the silence after, about the ghost she had carried for so long. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was simply living. But she knew one thing. The sky had never left her. And it never would. What happens when a single act of defiance ripples outward, touching lives you'll never see? 6 months after the Rafale flight, the shockwaves still hadn't settled. Military forums buzzed with debates. Aviation journals dissected every maneuver she'd performed, frame by frame. Some called it reckless. Others called it art. All agreed on one thing. Ghost had returned, and in 20 minutes she had changed everything. But Sarah didn't care about the debates. She cared about the quiet changes no one noticed. Investigations widened. Coleman's arrest uncovered decades of corruption, falsified reports, sabotaged careers, missions altered for his personal gain. 15 other officers were implicated. Sweeping reforms followed, some cosmetic, others structural. A culture built on silence and intimidation began to fracture. Not quickly, not completely, but enough that cadets whispered differently in the halls, enough that new pilots asked harder questions of their instructors. For Sarah, the ripple came home in ways she hadn't expected. Brad Thompson, once the arrogant center of gravity, published a letter. Not a statement written by lawyers or handlers, a letter in his own hand, raw and clumsy. I mocked someone I didn't understand. I used my privilege to silence voices that threatened me. I thought being loud made me strong. It made me small. I can't undo what I did, but I can do better. His words spread through the aviation community, surprising everyone who had once followed his swagger. Within months, Brad began mentoring disadvantaged youth who dreamed of flying. Kids from neighborhoods that had never seen a runway now sat in cockpits of flight simulators, because the man who once sneered at others had been broken open by the truth. The 3 novice pilots Sarah had led, Phoenix 2, 3, and 4, graduated with honors. Their confidence soared. They wore small patches with a ghost emblem stitched onto their flight suits. Unauthorized, unofficial, overlooked by command. But every time they saw one another, the patch reminded them of the day a woman had lifted them higher than they thought possible. And Jennifer Adams, the one who had once looked away, stood at the front of her own classroom at the academy, teaching new pilots what Sarah had taught her. Flying isn't about dominance, it's about trust. It's about lifting the weakest until they find their strength. That's how you survive. That's how you lead. Sarah never claimed credit. She didn't need to. At Desert Valley High School, her own classroom transformed. Students who once avoided advanced mathematics begged to be transferred in. They whispered that Ms. Mitchell's class was different, that she didn't just explain formulas, she explained life. She used math as a language to teach resilience. She told them a quadratic wasn't about numbers, it was about seeing the hidden arc of possibility. She taught that solving for was like solving for courage. You don't guess, you work through the steps. One student asked once, "Why do you care so much if we get this right?" Sarah had paused, chalk in hand. Because one day, something will feel impossible to you. And if you've learned here that even impossible things can be broken down into smaller steps, maybe you'll remember that you can survive more than you think. Word spread. Enrollment in her classes doubled, then tripled. Parents requested her by name. Even students who hated math signed up because they wanted to learn whatever it was she was teaching between the equations. Her AP Calculus class posted a 100% pass rate, unprecedented for their district. But Sarah never spoke about the raffle, never mentioned her past. She didn't need to. She carried it in her tone, in her patience, in the unshakable way she believed in them. Sometimes, though, reminders came anyway. At lunch duty, a student shyly handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it after class. The handwriting was uneven, the words shaky. "Ms. Mitchell, I was going to quit school. I didn't think I could do it. But the way you explained math made me feel like maybe I wasn't broken. I don't know if I'll ever fly a jet or anything like that. But today, I solved a problem I thought was impossible. Thank you for making me feel like I can." Sarah folded the note carefully, placing it in her drawer beside James' letter. She thought of her brother often, not with the sharpness of grief anymore, but with something softer. When she watched her students grasp something they thought unreachable, she saw him there, laughing, steady, protective, reminding her why she hadn't walked away entirely. One evening, as the desert sun slipped low, Sarah stayed late grading. The classroom hummed with quiet. On her whiteboard, equations sprawled across the surface. In the corner, a student had drawn wings with chalk. Messy, uneven, but unmistakably wings. She stared at them for a long time. Was this what James would have wanted? Not revenge, not medals, but this lifting others until they could fly. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Jennifer: just flew my first training sortie as an instructor. Used your barrel roll defense lesson. Cadet nailed it. Thought you should know. Sarah smiled, tucked the phone away. Outside, the night air was cool. She ran her 10 miles, the rhythm steady, her breath easy. Every step was a prayer she didn't speak out loud, that the ripples would keep spreading, that the sky she had carried in her soul might now rest in others too. But she knew better than most: change comes slow, justice comes slower, and some battles never end. As she turned the last corner toward home, a thought whispered across her mind. Sometimes it isn't about the roar of engines or the crack of a sonic boom. Sometimes it's about the quiet after, when someone, somewhere, feels strong enough to keep going. The ghost of wings brushed her shoulders. And Sarah kept running. What does it mean to honor the fallen, when the cause of their fall was not the enemy, but the very system sworn to protect them? 1 year after the Raffle flight, Edwards Air Force Base hosted a ceremony unlike any other. Not a parade, not a graduation, a memorial. The granite slab stood newly polished under the desert sun, black and unyielding. Etched into its face were names of aviators who had not died in combat, but from something quieter, crueler: failures of leadership. Lives ended not by enemy fire, but by betrayal, negligence, and ambition. Among those names, cut sharp and permanent, Captain James Mitchell. Sarah stood near the back, dressed in civilian clothes. No uniform, no medals, no insignia. To most of the crowd, she was no one: a teacher, perhaps, or a local guest. That was how she wanted it. But she read the names like they were etched into her own skin. Every syllable carried weight. Every letter bled memory. When the chaplain spoke of sacrifice, of lessons learned too late, Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the stone. She heard the cadence of his voice, but she also heard James laugh, the steady way he had once calmed her before her first solo flight. She felt the ache of rain-soaked Arlington, flag folds precise, a bugle cutting the November air. After the service, the crowd shifted, clusters forming, quiet conversations rising. Sarah stayed apart until she heard a familiar voice. "Ms. Mitchell." Jennifer Adams, now Captain Adams, stood before her in full dress uniform. Time and experience had sharpened her presence. She no longer carried the nervous weight of someone waiting for permission. She carried authority now, confidence. "I've been using your teaching methods," Jennifer said. "With my cadets, leading by lifting, it works. It's revolutionary." Sarah's lips curved faintly. "It's not revolutionary, it's just human. We've spent so long teaching dominance that we forgot to teach excellence. They're not the same." Jennifer nodded, eyes flicking to the memorial. "It's different now, slowly, but different, and that's because of you." Sarah shook her head gently. "Because of James, I just reminded them." They walked together toward the parking lot, but a voice stopped them. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you Ghost?" A young lieutenant stood there, fresh out of training, wings still bright on her chest. She looked nervous, but her eyes carried something else: hope. Sarah hesitated. Deflecting was her instinct, but the look in the young woman's eyes pulled her still. "I used to be," Sarah said quietly. "Now I'm just a teacher." The lieutenant shook her head, words tumbling out fast. "When I saw that video of the raffle, it changed everything for me. I was ready to quit. I thought I didn't belong. But you showed me that belonging isn't about fitting in. It's about flying true." Her voice cracked. "You saved me." Silence fell between them, heavy with truth. Sarah reached out, touched the lieutenant's wings with 2 fingers. "Then fly true, Lieutenant. And remember this: they can take your uniform. They can strip your rank. They can even ground your aircraft. But they can't take the sky from your soul." The young woman swallowed hard, nodded, and stepped back. Jennifer watched, her expression soft. "Do you realize what you've done? You've become a mirror. People see themselves in you. And when they do, they find courage they didn't know they had. Sarah looked toward the memorial again, the names gleaming against the stone. Her voice came low, steady. Mirrors don't create courage, they just reflect it. James carried it long before I did, and now others will carry it after us. The desert wind stirred, dry and sharp, carrying dust across the tarmac. The ceremony was ending, but Sarah lingered a moment longer, her hand resting against her brother's name. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a single act. It was a choice made again and again. She had carried anger for 10 years. It had weighed her down, cut her off from the sky, pressed her into hiding. But standing there, she felt something release. Not because Coleman deserved forgiveness. He never would, but because James did. James had always believed in choosing what was right, even when it hurt, and maybe letting go of vengeance was the last way to honor him. Sarah whispered softly, words only the stone could hear. I remember James always. When she finally turned away, the sun was lowering, painting the Mojave in shades of gold and crimson. Overhead, a formation of T-38s cut through the sky, precise against the dying light. Young pilots, fresh wings, the future. Sarah stood still, watching until they disappeared into the horizon. Sometimes strength wasn't the roar of engines or the crack of a sonic boom. Sometimes strength was silence, dignity, choosing to build instead of destroy. And as she walked back to her car, the ghost of wings brushed her shoulders once more. What remains when the battle is over, when the uniforms are folded away, and the world no longer remembers the roar of your name? 2 years passed. At Desert Valley High School, Ms. Mitchell's classroom had become something close to legend. Students fought for a seat, not because she made math easy, she didn't, but because she made it meaningful. She taught as though every equation mattered, as though the act of solving something small could echo into a life solved bigger. Her walls were lined with scribbled notes, not from textbooks but from her students, some framed, some taped crookedly. You made me believe I could pass. You taught me how to keep trying. You saw me. Sarah carried them the way she once carried flight logs, every message a record of someone who had flown a little higher because she had been there. One crisp October afternoon, while gradding under the soft hum of the classroom clock, she heard a knock. General Roberts stood at the door, older now, slower in the way he moved, but his eyes were still sharp, his bearing still unmistakably military. "Permission to enter, ma'am," he said with the faintest smile. Sarah set down her pen, always. He eased into a student desk, the wood creaking under his weight. For a moment he looked around at the posters, the chalk-dusted boards, the quiet hum of a world far from war. "You've done more here than we ever did out there," he said softly. "I read about your students, highest scores in the district, but more than that, you've changed the way they see themselves." Sarah folded her arms, leaning back. Numbers are just numbers. It's the stories we attach to them that matter. Robert studied her. "Do you ever miss it, the sky?" She paused, a long silence. "Every day, but missing isn't the same as needing. I had my time up there. Now I belong here." He nodded, then slid a small box across her desk. She recognized the shape instantly, the black velvet, the weight of what it contained. "I know you declined before," Roberts said, "but this isn't for ceremony. No cameras, no speeches, just between us. A token. For what you carried, what you endured, what you changed." Sarah stared at the box. Slowly, she opened it. The Medal of Honor gleamed under the dim classroom light. For a moment she saw James, the flag folding, the dirt of the burial ground, the ache of silence that had followed. Then she closed the box gently and pushed it back. "My brother was the hero," she said quietly. "I was just his witness." Roberts exhaled, not disappointed but humbled. Then maybe that's what a hero really is, a witness who refuses to stay silent. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken things between them. Finally, Roberts rose, straightened his coat. At the door he paused. "You once told me some wings can't be taken away. You were right. I hope you know that." Sarah gave him a faint smile. "I do, but they don't belong to me anymore. They belong to every student who walks out of this room believing they can fly." When he left, the classroom was quiet again. The sun dipped low, painting long shadows across the desks. Sarah looked at the chalkboard, at the messy wings still drawn in the corner from months ago. She didn't erase them. That night on her balcony, she watched the desert sky deepen from gold to indigo to black. Stars scattered like fireflies across an endless canvas. For a long time she stood still, her breath steady, her heart quiet. No engine roared, no crowd waited, no name was spoken. And yet she felt it, the sky still lived in her bones. She thought of James again, of the raffle, of Coleman in handcuffs, of Jennifer lifting cadets instead of tearing them down, of Brad teaching kids who had never seen a runway, of a young lieutenant holding onto her wings with trembling hands, of every student in her classroom who had written, "I thought I couldn't, but now I know I can." This was the mission, not vengeance, not recognition, not the roar of applause. Just this, quiet strength, dignity that didn't need to announce itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And Sarah Mitchell, the simple woman once told to take off her uniform, knew the truth at last. You can take away the fabric, the stripes, the salutes. But you can never take away the sky from someone who has learned how to fly. She closed her eyes, breathing in the silence. And in that silence, the ghost of wings brushed her shoulders one final time.